You've probably heard sometime in the past in your life the concept that life is nothing more than a series of choices. If you stop and think about it, that's actually pretty true. I hope, as I said earlier, you all had an enjoyable 4th of July yesterday. Fireworks seems to be a real big part of that celebration, especially at night. We tried to stay up and watch a few, but we can hear them, but we just couldn't see them. So we just gave up and went to bed, and that was fine too. We had a nice party at our house, as I mentioned. Everybody had a great time. Back in the early 80s, in some of my more non-focused moments in my life, when my 2 older daughters were young teenagers, I tried to impress them and their friends with some real fireworks. We lived in Southern California at the time, and all those California fireworks are just wimpy, in my opinion. They're not fun to watch, they're not fun to participate in, they don't make loud bangs, and they don't go way up into the sky. I liked power, I liked action, I liked all this dramatic stuff. So I had some friends out of state, and I was traveling a lot back then, so what I did is I smuggled a lot of illegal fireworks into California. Now kids, this is not the way you do things today. I'm just telling you some of the stupid things that I've done in my life. So I got these fireworks in, and they were pretty spectacular. My kids and their friends, the streets were just lined with young teenagers, and they were going ooh and ah, and wow, and that kind of great stuff. So I decided it was really cool, but I wanted to make it even cooler. So what I did is I got this one piece of firework that you could put it up on something, and it would spin, and it would shoot rockets in different directions, and they would explode and all this kind of stuff. We had this big telephone pole in the corner of our house. We were a corner house. So I got my ladder out, and I got this thing, and I mounted it on the side of the telephone pole. And then I had a long fuse on it, and I climbed down off the pole so I could get away from it in time, because it was a big piece of firework. I lit it, and man, did it take off. It was so cool. It was throwing rockets here and rockets there, and there was explosions taking place in the sky, explosions taking place on the ground. The kids were backing up. The neighborhood was just going crazy, and all of a sudden, the telephone pole was on fire. It was one big firework. It was unbelievable. You know that stupid decisions like this one, and believe me, this was a stupid decision. But you know what? All of us, at times in our lives, make stupid decisions, don't we? I bet everybody in this room can think of one pretty quickly if you took just a moment or two about thinking about some kind of stupid decision that you made in your life. And many times these stupid decisions have consequences with them. Turn with me, if you would, to Psalm 32. Psalm chapter 32. And sometimes the decision-making that we make, it's not so obvious, and we have to sort of work through it and think about it, but even then, sometimes we still make sometimes the stupid choices. In one of the classic episodes of the Dick Van Dyke Show, and most of you who are over the age of 50 probably remember this, there was a show where they had problems with their son, Richie, and he had a girlfriend, her name was Priscilla. For a period of time, Richie would come home from school every day and be beat up and bruised by this girl. Well, Rob, which was Dick Van Dyke, he was the father, and Laura, which was played by Mary Tyler Moore, who was the mother, were at a loss at what to do. So Laura chooses to go to Priscilla's parents and discovers that Priscilla's parents are very aggressive. Her mother's very aggressive and her father's very passive. Well, Laura and the mother have words, and Laura storms out of the house, getting nowhere with this mother. In light of no resolution with Priscilla's parents, Rob and Laura hesitantly make the decision to tell Richie it's okay to defend himself against Priscilla. Don't sit there and take a beating. The next day, Rob comes home from work early to see what actually happened with Richie the next day at school. Richie had not come home yet, and both Rob and Laura are anxiously awaiting his arrival. Well, Richie comes home, and he's in the house, and he's getting ready to play, and he's in good spirits and doing stuff, and Rob and Laura stop him and ask, how the day went and how was the interaction with Priscilla. And did she hit him? Richie said she did not. Oh, she did. He asked you, did she hit you? And he said, yes, she did. She said, well, did you hit her back? And he said, no, I didn't hit her back. He said, Richie said, she's a girl and I don't hit girls. So his parents asked him, so what did you do? And he paused. He looked at him. He said, I kissed her. You kissed her? Both of them asked incredulously. Yes, every day she kept telling me, kiss me or I'm going to beat you up. Shocked and dismayed at this new information, they asked, why didn't you tell us this in the first place? Richie responds, because it was too yucky to talk about. So he took his beatings instead. Sometimes our decisions are based on information that's not readily understood or readily accepted. So what if we have made a stupid decision? How do we deal with it? Point number one that I'd like to discuss about fixing stupid decisions. You've heard the saying, you can't fix stupid. Well, I'm going to attempt to fix stupid today. Point number one is take full responsibility of the decision that you made. If you made a mistake or did something stupid, own up to it. Admit it. Let's look at Psalms 32. Psalm 32, we'll see that David understood he needed to fess up and accept responsibility for everything that he had done in his life. Let's begin here in Psalm 32 and verse 1. Psalm 32, 1. Blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man to whom the Lord does not impute iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit. When I kept silent, my bones grew old through my groaning all the day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My vitality was turned into the drought of summer, Selah. In other words, when he didn't admit what he had done, when he didn't accept responsibility for the transgressions that he had made, for sometimes some of the stupid decisions that he made. He said he groaned and moaned inside because he knew God was watching. He knew God knew, but he wouldn't fess up. And then he goes on in verse 5, he said, I acknowledged my sin to you. I admitted it. And my iniquity I have not hidden. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the iniquity of my sin, Selah. See, when David realized, when he owned up to his transgression, he knew that God knew that he did it, but God wanted him to admit it. God wanted him to bring it to him and say, God, I really messed up. I made a big mistake. I did something really stupid. God wants to hear those words come out of our mouth. We're going to see more about that a little bit later. He said, don't explain it away, don't minimize it, or don't shift the blame to other people. Accept it. You did it. It was your choice. Admit it, acknowledge it, and accept it. Just admit that you blew it and take full responsibility. That's what David's trying to point out here. And when you do that, God forgives and you can move on, and the relief is almost immediate. Let's go to Proverbs 28, just a few pages to your right. Proverbs chapter 28. Right near the end of the book of Proverbs. Solomon, like his father, understood the value of accepting and owning our own mistakes and our own bad decisions. Here in Proverbs 28, he points out that when we minimize our faults, it can actually hurt our chances to grow and our chances to prosper. It's a roadblock in our Christian walk, in our Christian life. Not owning up to the decisions that we make, not accepting it, not admitting it. We're going to look at just one verse here in Proverbs 28 and verse 13. Proverbs 28, verse 13. He who covers his sins will not prosper. He who tries to hide their sins, he who doesn't admit to their sins, he who doesn't take ownership of their transgressions. He said, they're not going to prosper. They're not going to go anywhere. They're just going to spin their wheels and get frustrated with life. But whoever confesses and forsakes them is going to have mercy. It allows God that pathway to connect in our lives. It allows God to forgive the stupid decision, the bad mistake. And it allows God to help us fix it. If we fail to acknowledge our mistakes and accept full responsibility for those mistakes, especially to God and to Jesus Christ, then others will probably get to the point of questioning our integrity. And our problems will in fact mount. They will grow. You know, it takes guts and true character to admit when you've made a mistake, especially a stupid one, because it's embarrassing and we don't want to admit it. Flip back again to Psalms 1. Psalm 1, way back at the book of Psalms. What else can we do to correct a stupid decision? First and foremost is admit it, accept it, acknowledge it, and own it. Accept it, be upfront about it. The second thing that we can do is we can wrap our heads around everything God has stated about the specific issue that we're dealing with. You know, the principles of God's word are miraculously able, as we heard in the sermonette, to help us navigate the paths of life. It can bring, as we heard in the sermon, it can bring liberty to our lives. God's way works. And if we can learn what God's way is about any particular aspect of life, we can have the answers of fixing anything. Anything. It doesn't matter. Because of that, Romans 8:28 is still in the Bible. You can look it up later, Romans 8:28. Let's see what David again says about this concept of wrapping our mind and our heart around everything that God says about something. This time, Psalm 1, beginning in verse 1. Psalm 1:1. I just love how David words this message. Pay particular attention to his wording. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. He shall be like a tree planted by the river's edge, that brings forth its fruit in season, whose leaf also shall not wither, and who whatever he does is going to prosper. How could you ask for anything more in life? David says, look at God's word, meditate on it day and night, think about it, absorb it, engross yourself in it. He said, when you do that, you start living differently. And when you start living differently, he says, it's like planting a tree right near the edge of the river where it's always got all the water it needs. It's got all the sunshine it needs. It's got all the attention it needs. And it produces fruit like crazy. And he says, whatever you do, when you do that, whatever you do, you're going to prosper. You can't miss. You can't miss. Brethren, we need to take advantage of this wonderful blessing of wisdom that God has provided us, the wisdom of his truth, the wisdom of his words, the wisdom of his thinking. It's all put together here in words of the Bible. Saturate our minds with God's own thoughts. Allow his thoughts to become our thoughts, so we think like him, not like humans. The principles of God's word will guide us in getting things back on track, no matter what we've done, no matter what poor decision or stupid decision we've made in our lives. Okay, we're making progress here. Let's go back to Proverbs again. Let's go to Proverbs 4 this time. Proverbs chapter 4. So what else can we do to fix a stupid decision in our lives? Well, we can work to understand fully what it was that was stupid about the decision. When we understand that, then it's easier to fix it. Back here in Proverbs 4, we can hear Solomon advising his son about his life and the decisions that he makes and how it's going to have an impact on his life. He shows we need to consider what we have done with our life. We can't just live it. We've got to live it and look back at it. Live it, analyze it. Live it, assess it. Live it, ask ourselves. I mean, we should be doing this all the time, not just at Passover season, not just at a holy day season. Looking at our lives and saying, how am I doing? Am I really making any progress? Like that one sermon I gave recently, Jesus Christ is going to ask the question. He has asked, is he really going to find faith on this earth when he comes back? Are we growing in those kinds of things in our lives? Or are we just treading water and thinking, hey, everything's okay. I go to church every week or almost every week. I do this and I do that, and I help people sometimes, and I'm concerned about people sometimes, and I love my family most of the time, and I'm nice to people sometime. That's not being a Christian. That's being a pseudo-Christian, a fake Christian, if you will. A true Christian really wants to know, how am I doing? David constantly pondered this. Solomon constantly pondered this. Paul constantly pondered this. Peter, once he got his act together, constantly pondered that. How am I doing? It's one thing to make a mistake. All of us do it. It's another thing to make the same mistake over and over and over and over again. Week after week, month after month, year after year. Let's look at Proverbs 4, beginning in verse 26. Proverbs 4, verse 26. Solomon writes this, he says, ponder the path of your feet. Ponder the path of your feet. Where have you been? What have you been doing? What am I doing with my life? What am I doing with my life? How do I live every day of my life? He said, and let all your ways be established. Think about how you're living your life and try to figure out, what do I need to do differently to make my life a better life in God's eyes? He said, do not turn to the right or do not turn to the left. In other words, stay on the straight and narrow. Remove your foot from evil. Don't go down any path that you know is going to create issues for you. Isn't being Christian hard enough without creating more problems? Making stupid decisions? Yet that's what we do. We bring more trauma, more difficulty into our lives because of the decisions we choose to make. We need to stop the cycle. We must take time to stop and evaluate our situation and figure out what it is that went wrong. Why do I keep making this bad decision? If you've got a problem with something in life, alcohol, sex, gambling, whatever it is, if you've got a problem in some area of life and you keep making bad decisions, ask yourself, why do I keep going back to that? See, if we never analyze why it is we do something, we're never going to know how to fix it. And we just can't pray, God, make me not want to do this. We've got to figure this stuff out. God expects us to figure some of this stuff out ourselves. Let's go back to Hebrews 12 real quick. Hebrews chapter 12, all the way to the back of the other end of the book. Hebrews 12, second to last chapter of Hebrews. We must do everything we can to gain knowledge and understanding that will prevent us and help us from making the same mistake or poor decision again in our lives. Some decisions we've made have really hurt us and really set us back. Sometimes it's so discouraging we flat give up. We keep coming to church, we keep doing this, we keep doing that, but we've basically given up on thinking we're ever going to do anything differently with our lives. And that's not solving the problem. That's just accepting it because that's me. It's the way I am. The greatest cop-out in life. Paul points out that some of the decisions may bring with them pain for us as well as others. There are laws that when are broken, they have a penalty that must be paid. It's like being disciplined, if you will, by God. If you jump from a tall building, the law of gravity is going to cause pain. There's a penalty to pay. And you can't change that. Let's pick it up here in Hebrews 12 and see what I mean. Hebrews 12, verse 11. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 11. Now, no chastening or pain seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward, it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. That is a mouthful of understanding in that one verse. He's saying, first of all, you are going to be chastised. You are going to suffer retribution because you are going to make mistakes. When you make mistakes, there's a penalty to pay. When you're paying the penalty and you're going through that pain and suffering, that's not fun. We all understand that. But he said, if you think about it from God's perspective, like David and Solomon told us, and ask ourselves, how am I living my life? Why am I living my life the way I'm living it? And learn from the pain and the suffering, because that's what he says, for those who have been trained by it, those who have learned lessons from it. Something positive comes out from that. He said the peaceable fruit of righteousness comes from pondering our paths and accepting the fact that we have a penalty to pay because we broke a law, because we did something stupid. He said, therefore, in verse 12, strengthen the hands which hang down and the feeble knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but rather be healed. In other words, get ourselves solid, get ourselves whole, get ourselves healthy, physically, spiritually, every way we can, so that we can be of benefit to other people. How much benefit can we be when we're always in the dumps? How much benefit can we be if we're spiritually handicapped or physically handicapped? We don't have the energy, we don't have the strength, we're incapable of doing certain things. He says we want to fix that, we want to get it right. When we come to understand the fullness of our stupid decisions and what impact it had, then I believe, and only then, can we make a change of course and course correction. This leads us to our next point. Let's go to 2 Peter, just a few more pages to your right. 2 Peter chapter 2. We'll see that once we have God's Spirit, a different judgment falls on us. Our next point is, point number 4, we must stop doing the stupid things in our lives. If we can, if it's at all possible. Now, sometimes it's an addiction of sorts, and it really takes effort, and it takes a support mechanism around us. We need God's support to be able to accomplish this sort of thing. We have God's Spirit, but we must exercise character. God's not going to fix what he knows you are capable of fixing yourself. That's where character comes into play. God knows what you can fix. God knows what you can't fix. God expects you to fix what you can fix. And God will fix everything else. It's a two-way street. Peter points out that once we make the commitment to God's way of life and then go back to our old ways, this does not bode well for us. This creates all kinds of new problems in our lives. Let's pick it up in 2 Peter 2, beginning in verse 20. 2 Peter 2, verse 20. For if, after they have escaped the pollution of the world through the knowledge of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, they are again entangled in them and overcome, the latter end is going to be worse for them than it was in the beginning. You think it was bad before you got converted with that past way of life? If you join God's way of life and then go back to that way of life, it's going to be a lot worse the second time around than it was the first time around. For it would be better, he says in verse 21, it would be better for them not to have known the way of righteousness than having known it, to turn from the holy commandment delivered to them. And that's one of the things that I advise people before they get baptized. This is a huge decision you're making. You're saying, before man and God, I am committing my life to God's way of life. And you're asking basically the entire world to start judging you differently because they know you've taken a stand. And everybody, whether they want to or not, is going to judge you differently, including God himself. And then he makes reference to Proverbs 26, which I'm not going to turn to, and he discussed a disgusting quote. You'll know what I'm talking about when I read it here. This disgusting quote about human behavior. Verse 22, 2 Peter 2. But it has happened to them according to the true proverb. A dog returns to its own vomit, and a sow, having washed, to wallowing in the mire. That's the analogy he makes, brethren. Once we've been given God's way of life, to keep going back and making those stupid decisions that hurt us and others around us, he said it's like a dog throwing up and going back and licking it up. I know, that's disgusting, isn't it? It's mentioned twice in the Bible, once in Proverbs 26 and once in 2 Peter 2. God wants you to look at it that disgustingly about the way we live our lives, the way we choose to look at our lives. It may seem odd to actually have to make this point, but we need to stop doing the things that have gotten us into trouble. That's the point. Over the years, I have counseled with far too many people that have recognized that they've made a bad decision, but then they go back to it over and over and over again. And after a while, when I've counseled with them, I've actually told them, you know what, I'm not going to invest any more emotion in this than you're willing to. If you're going to keep going back and doing the exact same thing that I've advised you to turn away from, I mean, why would I keep putting the energy into this if you're not willing to? And God's the same. God's not going to put any energy into something we just keep going back to. It's like, you're like the dog going back to its vomit. And it's disgusting to God. That's how disgusting it is to you. That's how disgusting it is to God. Exact same analogy. So we need to stop doing these stupid things in our lives. But we've got to want to stop it so badly that we will do whatever is required to forge a new path in our lives. And sometimes that doesn't happen until the pain reaches a very high threshold. We can prevent that. Turn now, if you would now, to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5. So now that we have determined to stop making decisions like this in the future in our lives, what next? Well, point number 5 is we really need to consider everything, and we need to ask for forgiveness from anyone whom we may have hurt by our stupid decisions. Even though our bad choice may not have been sinful, and sometimes they're not, it still may have been hurtful and harmful to other people. And we need to ask ourselves, who have I hurt as a result of this decision? And if so, and please don't discount who or how we may have hurt someone else. The easiest thing to say is, oh, they should just get over it. That's discounting it. That's not owning it. That's not accepting the responsibility that we brought forth. It's not their fault we made this stupid decision and it impacted and hurt them. Why should they have to live with that? We need to go to them. And we need to go do whatever we can to rebuild that relationship, whatever it is and however it is. Matthew understood this concept that he heard from Christ from the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 5, let's pick it up in verse 23. Matthew 5, verse 23. Christ said, therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar, you decide to go to God, you're going to give him an offering, you're going to offer service, you're going to volunteer to be a song leader, you're going to volunteer to give sermonettes, you're going to volunteer to be a minister, you're going to volunteer to be a deacon, you're going to volunteer to be whatever. You're willing to give to God. He said, you bring your gift to the altar, and there, before you get this all thing delivered, you remember that your brother has something against you. You hurt somebody. And you know that person is still holding that grudge against you. Maybe we made a stupid decision that hurt our brother or our sister. Verse 24, he said, stop what you're doing right there. Quit. Leave your gift there before the altar. Get up and go your way. First, be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Because you are basically unclean in the eyes of God if we try to do things that we are trying to do as spiritual people, no matter what it is. And we can come here, we can put on our Sabbath best. But if we're living a life where we've hurt others and we don't fix it. We're just frauds. Just a bunch of frauds if that's the way we live. And God says, you know, I'm not listening to anything you say. I'm not accepting any of your gifts. I'm not accepting any of your service. I don't care about your money. I don't care about any of that. None of that means anything to me anymore because you're not doing what you're supposed to do. Matthew then points out an extension of this whole concept of resolving issues with others because of our decisions. In verse 25, he said, agree with your adversary quickly while you are on the way with him, lest your adversary deliver you to the judge, and the judge hand you over to the officer, and then you get thrown into prison. He's saying this can go to the extreme. Cut somebody off on the freeway. It's cost people their lives to do that. You never know how the person's going to react. Matthew's saying, go the extra mile. Be the benevolent one. If you've got an adversary, man, don't antagonize the adversary because you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, they could really make a mess of your life. Resolve it. Get it over with. Get it behind you. Get it under the water. Assuredly, he says in verse 26, I say to you, you will by no means get out of there until you've paid every last penny. If you let it go to the extreme, it's going to be too late. And then you got a whole new set of problems. He said, don't let life go that far. Go back to point number one. Acknowledge you made a mistake. Admit it and be willing to fix it. It may even get to the point of turning the other cheek, so to speak. Humbly take responsibility and ask for forgiveness. Don't add any qualifiers to your apology at all. In other words, don't say, I'm sorry I did that, but, and then explain, justify, whatever, why you did it. Just apologize and ask them to forgive you for blowing it. You blew it. You made a mistake. You made some stupid mistake. And it hurt them. It's no guarantee they're going to forgive you, but you've got to make the effort. We have to. Let's go back to Proverbs again. Yep, Proverbs one more time. Proverbs 11 this time. Proverbs 11. Another thing to consider in this about reconciling is restitution. If you make a mistake or a stupid decision that has caused a loss for somebody else, then it is our responsibility to repay the loss no matter what it takes. I know this may be difficult at times, but it's the right thing to do. It's what God says needs to be done. What is the next step we can do to fixing our stupid decisions? Point 6, we can seek wise counsel to help formulate a solid solution to better decision making. This is a principle in life that can save us a lot of heartache. A lot of heartache. Here in Proverbs 11, we once again hear from Solomon, who makes it clear that we need to surround ourselves with more wise people. We have a tendency to take scriptures like this and just say, well, I've got this really good friend, and he or she's the one I go to all the time when I've got an issue. Well, he or she may think just like you, and you're not going to get any counterbalancing opinions and points of view, and it's not going to help you make better decisions. So look at Proverbs 11 and see what I mean. Proverbs 11, verse 14. Proverbs 11, 14. Where there is no counsel, the people fall. But in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. This is one of the principles that spawned United Church of God's Council of Elders. We surround ourselves with a multitude, 12 counselors. And they are as diverse can be, from one end of the spectrum to the other. And that multitude of counselors is what keeps us from making big, bad decisions. Does it prevent all of them? No, it never will, because we're all human. We're all human. The human element always has a tendency to make bad decisions here and there. But when you've got a multitude of counselors, And it doesn't mean finding people who will agree with you. It's mean go to people that you look at and you know they use wisdom in their lives. And if you got a point, bounce it off of them. Ask them for their opinion. See what they think. I mean, I've done this several times. It's taken me a long time to get to this in my life. But I've got some people that I know that I have some confidence in. And when I get ready to make some kinds of big decisions or something like this, or something that may have an impact on other people's lives, I'll say, what do you think of this? And I've actually had some of these people at times say, man, that's really stupid. But you've got to have somebody be willing to tell you that. Now, does that hurt when you hear that? Yeah, it does at first, but after a while you think, it really was a stupid decision. I can't even believe I brought that subject up. That's what the whole concept of having a multitude of counselors is all about. Again, it doesn't mean people who are going to agree with you. That's a road to failure and pain. Because they're going to say the same things they think you want to hear. Be willing to go and listen to those whom you believe have the wisdom and seek their counsel. Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, let's turn there. 1 Corinthians 15 points out if we go against this whole concept of seeking counsel, it can destroy us. 1 Corinthians 15. And it's in here somewhere. It is highly recommended that we find several godly advisors who will sort of act like our board of directors in life, if you will. These advisors are going to be your go-to people when you need input for making decisions and resolving major issues in your life. You don't need a dozen of them. I would suggest, this is just me, I would suggest at least three. At least three people that you can go to, and you're close enough to them that you can divulge something that may even be personal and say, I'm having a difficulty with this, what do you think? And listen to them. Be willing to listen to them. I've got a couple of guys that I know that when I bring stuff up that's like on the outer edges of reason, I know I'm going to get conflicting feedback from them. I know I am. Because they don't think like I think. But I respect them. So when I go to them and I put something to them, 9 times out of 10, I say, I think you might want to rethink that one. And that's what you want to hear. Because then they'll say, this is why. And they'll explain to you, I never thought of that. The I never thought of that is the killer. Because that's what allows us to make stupid decisions. I never thought about the outcome. I never thought it would be that bad. These godly friends can help you to make good decisions and to help you resolve problems when they arise from bad decisions you've already made. You can use them from both ways. If we don't take this path, 1 Corinthians 15 will show us what the result can be in our lives. 1 Corinthians 15, just one verse, a short verse, but a powerful verse. 1 Corinthians 15:33. Do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good habits. You can be as righteous as you want to be. You fellowship with and keep company with people who make stupid and bad decisions. They are going to affect you. It's a fact of life. Solomon put it back in the book of Proverbs. He said, stay away from people like that. It's just going to ruin your life. Get around counselors. Get around wise people, not around people that are iffy. Well, I know he's got one foot in the world and another foot over here and another foot over there. It's like, but he's fun to be around, or she's fun to be around. It's like, yeah. The Bible tells you sin can be fun. Is that what you want more of in your life? If you do, then go down that path. And then one of these days, maybe this sermon will come back to mind, and then God will slap you around a little bit, bruise you up, beat you up like Priscilla did to Richie, because he wouldn't do what she asked him to do. What's the last point? Proverbs 19. I think it's the last time we're going to go to Proverbs today. Proverbs chapter 19. Proverbs 19. Last point. Point number 7. Create a plan for getting ourselves back on track with where we should be. If you think you're off track in your life somehow, maybe you've made too many bad decisions, and you know, when you ponder your paths, you look at your path and you say, that is one crooked path. It goes to the right, it goes to the left, it goes up, it goes down, it goes crooked. It's not straight at all. Something has to change. Stop and think about it. What can I do to live my life differently? I mean, put a plan together. Ask your counselors. Would you be willing to get together with me for a weekend or something and help me redirect my life? Establish what you need to do differently now, differently than what you've been doing in the past. You can't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. It's not going to happen. Determine what the best potential outcome can be, then think through the specific steps about how you need to change to get to that preferred outcome. If you're just 100% happy with your life the way it is right now, then you can totally disregard this sermon. If, however, you look at your life and say, I wish I could have it better, there's a way you can do that. Look at Solomon's comment about our plans through here in Proverbs 19, and look at verse 21, just one verse again. Proverbs 19 and verse 21. There are many plans in a man's heart. Nevertheless, the Lord's counsel, that is what will stand. That is what our plan of life has to be based on. It has to be based on this book, these words, these concepts, these principles, these edicts, these moralities. Just like we heard in the sermonette, when we put together the Constitution of the United States and our Declaration of Independence, they based it on these principles. I was reading in the paper just this last couple of days, and I was reading some of the similar quotes that Denton used in his sermonette. And Jackie and I were just sitting, and our jaws just dropped. Said, boy, have we strayed off that path. We're not even close to that path anymore. Look what happened when we lived it for 200 years. Look at what we've got now that we've strayed off that path. Chaos in almost every aspect of living in a life. It's the same thing with us as humans. If we allow God's principles to be the foundation on which we build everything, there's nothing we can't stop. There's nothing we can't fix. There's nothing that God won't help us with. There's nothing that we can't accomplish. And there's no stupid decision that can't be corrected. Contrary to popular belief, I believe you can fix stupid. I think we discussed some of that today. And I think we can quit making stupid decisions if we really want to. In case you're wondering about that telephone pole that I lit on fire with my stupid decision back then, one of my more mature adult neighbors had already had a hose hooked up at his house, ready to go, and he got another neighbor to hook one up at my house, ready to go, unbeknownst to me. My neighbors knew me, and they helped me prevent a serious problem from a stupid decision. It was my lucky day after my stupid decision. Have a great Sabbath.